It was a cold Tuesday morning when everything changed. The kind of day that didn't seem like anything special at first. No meetings on the calendar, no major decisions to make, just another day at Titan Technologies. At least, that's what I thought when I walked into the office. I had been with Titan for over 20 years, and in that time, I had seen the company go from a small tech firm with just a handful of employees to the industry giant it was now. I'd seen the highs and the lows, the struggles and the triumphs, and I had been there through it all. The right hand to Charles Thompson, the man who founded this company. Charles had built something remarkable, and I was proud to have been a part of it. But on that morning, everything changed. Kyle Thompson, Charles's son, the new CEO of Titan Technologies, called me into his office. He had only taken over a few months ago, but I could already feel the tension in the air. There was something different about the way he carried himself, something cold and calculating. Not like his father, who always believed in doing business with integrity and long-term vision. Kyle was more focused on quick results, big profits, and making changes at breakneck speed. When I walked into Kyle's office that day, I could tell something was off. He didn't greet me with his usual handshake or ask about my family like he used to. Instead, he just motioned for me to sit down, his face set in that corporate, unreadable expression. I thought maybe he had some new initiative he wanted to discuss or some strategic decision to bring to my attention. Instead, what came out of his mouth was something I wasn't prepared for. "Henry, I've decided to make some changes around here," Kyle began, his voice flat and emotionless. "You've been an important part of this company for a long time, but the direction we're going in now requires a different approach. I'm letting you go." It hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. How could this be happening? I had given 2 decades of my life to this company. I had worked through every crisis, every tough decision, and now Kyle was telling me it was over. Just like that. I'm not one for drama, never have been. I don't like to show my emotions in front of people, and I definitely didn't want to make a scene in his office. So I just nodded and asked him about the severance package. It wasn't much of a surprise when he confirmed that I would receive a generous severance. 2 years' worth of salary. It was in my contract after all. But that didn't matter. The money wasn't what hurt. The hurt was in the betrayal, the lack of respect. Kyle had barely looked me in the eye during that meeting. He spoke as though he were firing someone he'd never met, someone he didn't owe anything to. It wasn't personal, it was just business. But I had spent my career helping Titan grow. It wasn't just a job to me, it was my legacy. And now, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. After the meeting, I gathered my things, a few framed photos from my desk, a couple of mementos from clients, a pile of paperwork that I had been meaning to sort through for months. It was surreal, walking out of that office with a cardboard box in my arms, the familiar surroundings of the company I'd helped build now feeling foreign, as though I didn't belong anymore. I walked past the glass windows of the building, where I could see Kyle's office on the top floor. He was standing there, no doubt watching me leave, but I didn't bother looking up. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me struggle. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. But the truth is, I was hurt. Deeply. The hardest part of it all wasn't the severance package, or even the fact that I was now unemployed. No, the hardest part was knowing that Kyle, the son of the man who had entrusted me with the company, had made this decision without a second thought. He wasn't interested in my experience or what I could offer. To him, I was just another relic of the past, a casualty in his mission to make Titan more modern, more profitable. I've always been the type to take the high road. I didn't lash out, didn't complain to anyone. I simply walked out of that building, took my severance, and went home. But there was a deep sense of betrayal that lingered in the back of my mind. I had devoted my life to Titan, and in the end, I was just another employee, discarded when the next generation decided it was time for a change. I spent the next few days thinking about my future. What was I going to do now? Where could I go from here? I had been with Titan for so long that it was hard to imagine a life outside of it. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let Kyle's decision define me. I'd been knocked down, but I wasn't out. I made a promise to myself that day. I wasn't going to let the last 20 years of my life be overshadowed by Kyle's need to tear down everything that had come before him. I would find a new path, a new way to keep moving forward, because in the end, no one could take away the experience I had gained, the knowledge I had built, or the person I had become. As I stood outside Titan Technologies for the last time, clutching a small cardboard box with some personal effects, I couldn't help but reflect on my 20 years with the company. The building before me, now looming in the distance, wasn't just made of glass and concrete. It was filled with memories, moments that I had poured everything into. It represented decades of hard work, sacrifice, and triumph. I could almost hear the echoes of the past, the late nights spent strategizing, the successes we celebrated, and the challenges we overcame. When I first arrived at Titan Technologies, things were very different. Titan wasn't the global powerhouse it had become. It was a small, struggling startup, barely making a name for itself in an overcrowded tech industry. There were only a handful of employees, all of us working together, trying to prove that we could go toe-to-toe with the bigger, more established players. Charles Thompson, the founder, had a clear vision for the company, but like most entrepreneurs, he needed the right people to help him bring it to life. And that's where I came in. Charles had handpicked me. I had been recommended by a mutual acquaintance, and after a few interviews, he offered me a role as operations manager. I was just 28, a young man with ambition but without much experience in leading a company. But Charles saw something in me, an ability to lead with integrity, to think long-term, and to stay grounded even in the most chaotic situations. He wasn't just looking for a cog in the wheel, he wanted someone who could keep the company running smoothly while also staying true to his core values: quality, trust, and service. From the very beginning, I felt like I was part of something special. Charles wasn't just a boss to me, he was a mentor. He showed me the ropes, taught me how to navigate the delicate balance between running a business and building a lasting reputation. Every decision I made, whether big or small, was guided by the principles he had instilled in me. Together, we built Titan into something that stood out for its integrity, something the industry could rely on. The early years were tough. We faced stiff competition, and there were moments when we weren't sure if we would survive. But we didn't back down. Charles and I were determined, and so was the small team we had assembled. We worked tirelessly, building relationships with clients, improving our processes, and perfecting our products. Slowly but surely, Titan began to grow. The first big break came when we landed a major contract with a client who, up until that point, had been loyal to a competitor. It was a massive win for Titan, and Charles and I were ecstatic. But that success didn't come easy. It came from years of groundwork, of building credibility and a reputation for doing what we said we would. When we got that contract, I knew we were on the right path. That was the moment I realized that Titan wasn't just going to survive, it was going to thrive. But while the wins kept coming, there were also challenges. With growth came more pressure. We had to expand our team, scale our operations, and keep up with the increasing demand for our services. It was a constant juggling act, and there were nights when I'd leave the office long after everyone else had gone home, wondering how we were going to manage it all. But Charles always had faith in me, even when I didn't have faith in myself. He trusted me with the tough decisions, and I never let him down. We were a team. I never worked for him, I worked alongside him. Titan Technologies wasn't just a job to me, it was my life's work. As the years went by, I became more entrenched in the company, and the company became more ingrained in my identity. I had a personal stake in its success, not just as an employee, but as someone who had helped build it from the ground up. I watched it grow, I watched it evolve, and I poured my energy into making sure that Titan stayed on top. There were tough times, economic downturns, industry disruptions, and difficult decisions about laying off employees or changing business strategies. But through it all, I stuck to the values that had been instilled in me. Every success Titan had, I knew I had played a part in. Every failure I took personally, learning from it and ensuring it wouldn't happen again. One of the proudest moments in my career came when Titan reached the milestone of its 10th anniversary. We had expanded globally, and the company was now recognized as a leader in the tech space. That year, Charles invited me to speak at our annual conference, a moment I will never forget. Standing in front of hundreds of employees and clients, I reflected on how far we'd come, how many challenges we had overcome, and how much Titan had achieved. I spoke not just about the company's growth, but about the people who had helped get us there, the employees, the clients, and especially Charles, who had believed in me from the very beginning. As I walked through Titan's corridors on that last day, I couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. Where had things shifted? Why did it feel like all my hard work, all the years I had dedicated to this company, had been wiped away in an instant? When Kyle Thompson, Charles's son, took over as CEO, I had hoped for a smooth transition. I knew things would change, but I never imagined that everything we had built would be so quickly dismantled. It wasn't just about the changes to the business itself, it was the way he treated the people who had helped make it what it was. People like me, people who had given everything for Titan. I thought about the second chance I had been given when Charles hired me. At 33, I had been laid off from a previous job, struggling to find my place in the world. Charles had taken a chance on me, and I had repaid that faith over and over again. Now, as I was being unceremoniously dismissed, I couldn't help but feel like everything I had worked for, everything I had built, was being thrown away. Would Kyle ever understand the value of what we had created together? Would he ever realize that the foundation of Titan wasn't just about profits and shareholders? It was about the people who had given their best years to make it what it was. But one thing I knew for sure, no matter what happened, the legacy of Titan wasn't just in its buildings or its profits. It was in the hearts of the people who had worked there, who had believed in its vision. And while I may no longer have a seat at the table, I knew that my time at Titan would always be a part of who I was. That was something Kyle could never take away. When Kyle Thompson, Charles's son, took over as CEO of Titan Technologies, I had mixed feelings. On one hand, I respected him. He was the heir to the company and, after all, the son of the man who had given me my second chance. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change, and not in ways I would necessarily agree with. It wasn't just the natural shift that happens when a new leader steps in. It was the way he seemed to disregard the very essence of what Titan was built upon. Kyle was younger, more business-focused, and far less sentimental than his father had been. While Charles was a visionary, someone who understood the value of relationships and the long-term game, Kyle was a product of the modern corporate world. He had an MBA from a prestigious university, had worked in investment banking before joining Titan, and was eager to make his mark on the company. He wasn't interested in the slow, steady growth that had defined Titan's success. He wanted rapid expansion, high profit margins, and immediate returns. From the first day he stepped into the CEO role, I could see the direction he wanted to take the company. He started cutting costs, reducing overhead, and quickly brought in a younger, more aggressive management team. They were all business school graduates with little experience in the practical side of running a company. They didn't understand the culture of Titan, the dedication to quality, the commitment to building lasting partnerships, the importance of treating employees like family. They were driven by spreadsheets, by numbers, and by the short-term goal of boosting stock prices. At first, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. He was new, and it was natural that there would be some growing pains. I even helped him with a few strategy meetings, offering my input on how we could modernize certain aspects of the business without abandoning what made Titan successful. But it was clear that he wasn't interested in my experience or advice. He was determined to take Titan in a new direction, and anyone who wasn't on board with that vision was quickly pushed aside. Kyle's first big decision was to overhaul Titan's product line. He believed the company had been too focused on quality and long-lasting products, and that we should instead focus on speed and volume. His vision was for Titan to become a leader in mass-market technology, with products that were cheap to produce but designed to be replaced quickly. It was a stark departure from the company's foundation of creating durable, high-quality products that could stand the test of time. I tried to argue against the shift, pointing out that it could harm the reputation we had worked so hard to build. But Kyle wasn't interested in hearing it. He had a clear plan, and he was determined to execute it, no matter the cost. As he implemented more drastic measures, such as moving production overseas to reduce labor costs, I began to see the cracks in the company's culture. The once tight-knit team of engineers, designers, and operations staff was now fractured, with many of the veterans leaving for other opportunities, disillusioned by the changes. The tension between Kyle's vision and the company's core values continued to grow. I watched as decisions were made in boardrooms, without any consideration for the impact on our employees or long-term sustainability. Kyle's team would make moves without fully understanding the internal dynamics of the company, and employees who had been loyal to Titan for years were suddenly being dismissed or ignored. What hurt the most was Kyle's treatment of Charles, his father. As much as I had respected Charles and his leadership, I saw how Kyle seemed to dismiss his father's advice at every turn. Charles had built Titan from the ground up, and Kyle seemed to want to erase that history, eager to forge his own path, even if it meant alienating the very people who had helped the company thrive. I had always considered Kyle to be a smart, capable man. But the more I watched him in action, the more I realized that his vision for Titan was not based on the same values that had guided the company for so long. His focus was entirely on the numbers, on achieving growth at any cost, without considering the long-term consequences. To him, employees were just assets to be managed, clients were opportunities to be exploited, and the company's legacy was something that could be molded and reshaped as he saw fit. The situation came to a head when he announced a massive restructuring plan. He was going to cut back on R&D, outsource key production processes to cheaper suppliers, and lay off a large portion of the staff. The rationale was clear. Titan needed to streamline its operations to remain competitive in an increasingly globalized market. The board seemed to be on board with his vision, and the shareholders were pleased by the promises of higher profits. But I knew that these changes were not just risky, they were dangerous. Titan had been built on trust, on quality, and on the relationships we had developed with both our employees and our clients. If we abandoned those principles, we were no longer Titan. We would just be another faceless corporation chasing profits. And I wasn't willing to stand by and watch that happen. I found myself at a crossroads. I had spent years building Titan into the company it was, and now I was being told that it no longer mattered. Kyle was determined to push forward with his changes, regardless of the damage it caused to the company's foundation. It was a frustrating, painful realization. I could either stand by and let it happen, or I could try to do something to stop it. But what could one man do against the tide of corporate ambition that Kyle represented? What could I do when the very company I had helped build was being dismantled by its new leader? As the days passed, I began to realize that my time at Titan might be coming to an end. Kyle had made it clear that he had no use for people like me, the ones who still believed in the old ways. And yet, despite all the changes he was pushing, I knew there was one thing he didn't understand. He had missed one crucial thing: the importance of people. The company wasn't just about profits or strategies or innovations. It was about the people who had made it great. And no matter how hard Kyle tried to change the business, he would never be able to replace the heart of Titan, the legacy that Charles and I had built together. That he could never take away. After Kyle Thompson's drastic changes, it didn't take long for the repercussions to start surfacing. As much as I tried to stay loyal to Titan and its legacy, the direction Kyle was taking the company was hard to ignore. And just as I expected, the moment came when I was forced to confront the reality of my situation. I was pushed out of the company. The official story was that the restructuring was necessary for company growth, and that my departure was part of the organizational realignment. I had seen it coming, but that didn't make it any less painful. I had devoted my entire career to Titan, and now it felt as though my years of hard work were being dismissed in favor of an aggressive, profit-driven vision. Kyle's leadership was a harsh reminder that in the corporate world, loyalty often takes a back seat to numbers on a spreadsheet. The moment I left, I knew I had to do something. I wasn't going to just fade into obscurity. I was too proud of the work I had done over the years. I immediately reached out to my lawyer, Douglas Martin. Douglas had been my legal counsel for many years, and we had worked together on numerous matters regarding Titan's business dealings. He was a sharp, strategic lawyer, and I trusted him with the most important decisions of my career. We began working on the wrongful termination suit against Titan. It wasn't just about the severance, although that was certainly important. No, this was about the principle of the matter. I had been part of the company from the ground up, and to be discarded so easily by someone who had barely any experience in the industry felt like a betrayal. I wasn't going to let it slide. Douglas and I spent countless hours reviewing my contract, analyzing every clause, every provision. The more we dug, the more we realized that Titan had violated several terms related to my employment, particularly around the nature of the termination. Kyle's sudden shift in company values had made the work environment hostile, and I felt my dismissal wasn't just business, it was personal. With Douglas's expertise, we were confident we had a strong case. But it wasn't just about the lawsuit. I knew I needed to consider my future. The legal battle could take months, and during that time, I had to figure out what I would do next. As it turned out, The universe had a way of surprising me. While I was strategizing with Douglas, I received a phone call from an old friend, John Davies. John was a former senior executive at Titan who had retired early after decades of dedication to the company. I had always admired his insight and experience, and he had been one of the few who shared my concerns about the direction Kyle was taking. John had stayed in touch with me over the years, and he knew I was now looking for new opportunities. He mentioned a company called Precision Technologies, a rising competitor in the field that had been expanding rapidly. They were looking for experienced professionals who understood how to manage operations on a larger scale, and John thought I'd be a perfect fit. I wasn't sure at first. I had spent so long at Titan that the idea of moving on was difficult to grasp. But John's call came at a time when I needed it most. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't ready to just walk away from the industry I had spent my life in. This could be the fresh start I needed, a place where my experience and values would be valued, not discarded. I contacted John and arranged a meeting with the CEO of Precision Technologies, a man named Alan Harris. Alan was smart, driven, and well-versed in the challenges of the industry. We met for lunch at a quiet restaurant, and he spoke to me about the company's plans for the future. They were looking to expand into international markets, and they needed someone who could lead their operations division. Alan was impressed with my background and seemed eager to bring me on board. As the conversation continued, it became clear to me that this could be a perfect fit. Precision Technologies was everything Titan used to be, a company that prioritized quality, reliability, and long-term growth over short-term profits. They had a clear vision, and their leadership team understood the importance of culture and employees. It was a stark contrast to the way Kyle had run things at Titan, and I felt a renewed sense of excitement at the prospect of joining them. While I was still in the middle of the legal battle with Titan, I knew that I had a real opportunity in front of me. My future was no longer tied to a company that no longer represented my values. The prospect of starting fresh with Precision Technologies gave me hope. I could move on, build something meaningful again, and, if things went my way, I could come out of this whole situation not just unscathed, but stronger than ever. At the same time, the lawsuit against Titan moved forward. I wasn't sure how it would all turn out, but with Douglas's guidance and the evidence we had gathered, I felt confident that I could hold Kyle and Titan accountable for their actions. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the principles that had made Titan great, and for the employees who had been discarded in the name of profit. In the end, I hoped that Titan would learn the hard way that companies built on a foundation of greed and short-term thinking could only last so long. As I prepared for my next chapter, I realized that my journey wasn't over. Titan may have pushed me out, but they had underestimated my ability to bounce back. There was more to come, and I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ethan Thompson, Kyle's father, and the founder of Titan Enterprises, had always been the pillar of the company. Titan had flourished under his leadership for over 3 decades, growing from a small regional player to an industry giant. Ethan had a unique approach. He valued relationships, long-term goals, and employee loyalty. Titan was a reflection of him, strong, reliable, and grounded. But the moment Kyle took the reins, everything started to unravel. As I continued to prepare for my legal battle with Kyle and Titan, news of the company's financial mismanagement began to reach my ears. Ethan, who had retired a few years before Kyle's ascension, had stayed in touch with a few key senior executives, including myself. We had exchanged occasional updates over the years, but nothing ever suggested there would be any issues with the company's future. It was a shock when I learned that Titan's financial situation had become so precarious under Kyle's leadership. He had aggressively cut costs, laid off longtime employees, and outsourced key operations to cheaper markets, all in the name of efficiency and growth. Yet, instead of seeing increased profits, Titan's bottom line started to decline sharply. Ethan had been quietly observing his son's actions, but as time went on, he could see the inevitable consequences of Kyle's decisions. It wasn't just the numbers that troubled Ethan. He could see the morale among the staff plummeting. The seasoned professionals who had helped build the company were gone, replaced by younger, less experienced workers who lacked the depth of knowledge to maintain Titan's reputation for excellence. Ethan began to feel a sense of guilt, realizing that he had handed the company over to someone unprepared for the task. Despite his concerns, Ethan didn't want to interfere too directly. After all, Titan was now Kyle's company, and as a father, he wanted to respect his son's autonomy. But as months passed and the company's financials grew more alarming, Ethan couldn't sit back any longer. The final straw came when a series of high-profile clients began to pull their business from Titan, citing poor product quality and missed deadlines, issues that had never been present before. It was then that Ethan realized the company he had spent his life building was on the brink of collapse. The values he had instilled in Titan were being systematically eroded by his son's decisions. And yet, despite all of this, Kyle remained stubborn. He refused to acknowledge the growing crisis, confident that his cost-cutting measures would ultimately pay off. The more Ethan tried to intervene, the more Kyle resisted. The father-son relationship, once strong and full of respect, began to strain under the weight of the company's failures. In desperation, Ethan reached out to me. He knew that I had the experience and knowledge of Titan's inner workings to help him navigate the mess Kyle had created. We met in secret, away from the eyes of the board and Kyle. Ethan poured his heart out to me, confessing how badly he felt about the situation. He was ashamed to see Titan in such disarray, especially since he had always prided himself on building a company that valued integrity and trust. I could sense his frustration and helplessness. He had built Titan from the ground up, and now it was crumbling under his own son's leadership. But as much as Ethan wanted to fix things, he knew that Kyle would never listen to him. The two were too far apart in their vision for the company's future. So Ethan made a difficult decision. He needed help from someone who understood the company's legacy, someone who wasn't afraid to challenge Kyle's reckless leadership. That someone was me. Ethan asked me if I would consider returning to Titan, not in my previous role, but in a more powerful position. He needed my expertise to stabilize the company and, if possible, steer it away from the brink of financial ruin. At first, I was hesitant. I had fought long and hard to get out from under Kyle's shadow, and the thought of going back to a company so full of turmoil was daunting. But as I listened to Ethan's plea and reflected on everything that had transpired, I realized that this might be my only chance to save Titan, not just for myself, but for the employees and clients who had relied on the company for years. I agreed to meet with the board and explore what could be done. As I walked through the halls of Titan for the first time in months, I couldn't help but feel a mix of nostalgia and bitterness. The company that had once been my home was now barely recognizable, its reputation tarnished by Kyle's short-sighted decisions. But I wasn't about to let it all slip away without a fight. As I sat in the boardroom with Ethan and the few remaining senior executives, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Ethan, with his quiet dignity, pleaded for a course correction. He asked the board to consider a merger with a more stable company, something that could bring in fresh capital and revitalization. The idea of a merger wasn't ideal, but at this point, it seemed like the only viable option to save Titan from bankruptcy. With the board's support, I became CEO, pushing Kyle out. His poor decisions had weakened the company, but the merger restored its strength. Kyle's new ventures failed, while Titan thrived under my leadership, focused on long-term growth and stability.